ahead. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. This is our ORCID workshop for researchers. So thank you for joining us. So we always like to start with this question. Feel free to just kind of chime in, put that on the chat. In the past, if you've already started working with ORCID or if you have not started working with ORCID, whether you have some challenges or barriers that you're kind of encountering with it. So feel free to chime in, answer that question via chat. All right, so today what we will do is, again, this is a workshop for researchers, and we'll just go through some of the kind of overview of what is ORCID, as well as the benefits of ORCID. And one of the biggest things that we will go through today is to really populate your ORCID record. So populating your ORCID record as well as maintaining it. So that's a big part of our session today. So that way you can make it easy for you as a researcher to kind of put all of your information into one um, kind of online CV. And then in the end, we will have some Q&A or questions and discussions to kind of further our understanding of what ORCID is, as well as how you can populate and maintain it. All right, so let's start with what is ORCID. ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. So it's an acronym. So that's really what ORCID is. And what we kind of want to let you know that there are actually components with ORCID. The first component is this, the ORCID ID. And this is the one that we're quite familiar with most likely already. And that's your unique identifier. So it's ORCID provides a free unique identifier for researchers. So this is what we're calling persistent identifier for individuals or for researchers. And what you're seeing here is actually my ORCID ID. So what you're seeing is that string of words, letters and numbers, right? So it's a 16-digit number, and that's your ORCID ID. That's your identifier. And it looks like a URL. And that's because it is. It is a link. And that link will take you to your ORCID record. And this is my ORCID record. So what you're seeing here is sort of like my online CV. I always like to think of it as sort of like my online CV. So it's got information about your employment, for example. And if we take this example here, so this is our volunteer researcher, Sofia Maria Hernandez Garcia, and we'll go through what we can find on her ORCID record. So the things, the different sections of the ORCID record. So with this, you will find an employment information, education and qualifications. You will also see professional activities, and professional activities are what we're calling memberships, service, so service to like say a professional organization, distinctions that you have received, invited positions, so those are all of your professional activities. And you will also have information about funding. So funding that you may have received from a grant funding agency. You will also have information about research resources. Now, research resources are what we're calling like, say, if you work with a national laboratory, for example, and you're using one of their equipment. So some national laboratories are able to push this information into your ORCID record. So that's a research resource. You will also find in your ORCID record uh, basically information about your works. Now, works is kind of like an overarching term of what we're calling with your publications, for example, or it could be patents, or it could be an artwork. So those are works. That's what you're seeing here in your ORCID record. And then you also have information about peer review activities. So if you've reviewed a journal, for example, some publishers are able to push that information into your ORCID record. So letting everyone know that you have reviewed, you're a peer reviewer for this journal, or even a funding information, for example. Funders can also push peer review activities if they're able to. Um, so they letting everyone know that you are a reviewer for this particular grant. Now, ORCID has different work types that's available, and this is in the that works section of ORCID, right? We're probably much more familiar with publications. So it could be like a journal article, book chapters, but lately we've been really, ORCID's been really pushing to put more work types into ORCID. So you could put more like artistic output, for example, or images that you have done, or musical composition. It could be a teaching material, patents interview, a conference presentation. A lot of this can be added to your ORCID record, and there are more kind of information that you can put in here. And this is really to get more of the, to have more presence in the humanities, the arts and sciences, all of those things are available here. I think we're much more familiar with ORCID with the STEM area, for example. But here we're adding more information or sections where you could enter more of your humanities and social sciences materials. So this is a lot of work types that's available here. Now, if you think about ORCID in more of um like on a larger scale. So ORCID in the research landscape. So as a researcher, you work with an employer, and then an employ when you're working, say, as a professor, for example, and you're going to apply for grants. So you're going to be working with a funder. And once you have worked with a funder and you're working on grants and doing a lot of this research, you will then work with a publisher to publish the works that you have done, the results that you have kind of done with your research. So all of this is really in the research landscape. All throughout these sections or these different areas of your work or your academic kind of life cycle, you are going to be using ORCID throughout this research landscape. So you could use your ORCID with your employer as you will do your faculty reporting. You will use your ORCID ID with a funder as you're working with the grants that you've received with them. And you're also using your ORCID ID and your ORCID record with a publisher to have all of your articles added to your ORCID record. So all of this, as a researcher, you're going to be kind of faced with having an ORCID ID throughout this life cycle. And we're going to go through that here today as well, especially when we're looking at the benefits of ORCID. All right, so if you don't have an ORCID ID yet, it takes less than 60 seconds to register for one. So it's very easy to register for an ORCID ID. And if you don't have one yet, we encourage you to have one. You don't have to be a researcher to have an ORCID ID either. It's good to have one, even if you're contributing to research, for example, or even if you're working with researchers, it's really good to have an ORCID ID so that way you know how to work with your researchers, for example, so you can tell them the different areas of ORCID that would be beneficial for them. All right, so now that we kind of give you an idea of what ORCID is, sort of like a general overview of what is ORCID, we're going to talk more about the benefits of ORCID. So why is it important to have an ORCID ID? Oh, I might have skipped a little bit there. All right, so the benefits of ORCID in general, it really distinguishes you as a researcher, right? The ORCID ID also persists over time, and your ORCID record bolster your digital identity as a researcher. Your ORCID ID and your ORCID record also meets requirements. So it could be requirements for funders, requirements from publishers, or it could even be requirements from your research organization that you work for. So like your universities, your colleges, or it could be your professional organizations, for example. Ultimately, all of this is really ORCID is to save you time as a researcher because you can save you time with filling out forms, for example, saving you time to fill out your form and when you're submitting manuscripts or filling out a form when you're submitting your grant applications. So all of this is to really save you time. And we're going to go through all of this sort of like in an individual basis so that way we can see more details on how this benefits you as a researcher. All right, so the first one, it distinguishes yourself from other researchers. So what you're seeing here on the screen is sort of like you know, a journal article essentially that have listed all the authors that are involved in this article. It's quite a lot of authors, and a lot of them also have the same names, right? The same last name, even the same first name initial. So we don't really know who's who. We don't know which author we're talking about, which researcher we're talking about. And having an ORCID ID kind of distinguishes one author or one researcher from another researcher. So you have that unique identifier. So we know exactly who we're talking about, which researcher that we're going to be talking about. All of this is really to make you distinguish yourself from another researcher. And especially if you have a common name, this is going to be an important one to have. It also persists over time. So a lot of us uses probably different names throughout our academic career, right? But we know if you have an ORCID ID, we know that all of the different variations of our name refers to the same researcher. So for example, this our volunteer researcher here with Sophia Maria Hernandez Garcia. Sophia uses different variations of their name throughout their academic career. Myself included, I do too. So I use my full name. Sometimes I have my middle initial in. Sometimes I spell out my middle name. So the different variations of my name, I have that included in my ORCID record. And all of those different variations kind of points to the same researcher. So it points all of them to myself. So that's really, it persists over time. And that's important. And the unique ID, the unique identifier as well, your ORCID ID, that's persistent. So that's unique to yourself. And also throughout your academic career, you have the same ORCID ID. So that's persistence in itself. So that's a persistent identifier for yourself. It also bolster your digital identity, right? So you're seeing an ORCID record. You know that this person is working at this institution or this organization. You know that this researcher have received this ORCID, this funding from this funding agency. So all of this is really to bolster your identity. So an example here again. So we have a list of authors and next to the authors, we have an ORCID ID icon. When you actually click to that ORCID ID icon, it will take you to their ORCID record. So we know exactly who the author is, what they have done, what other things they have done as a researcher. And also, all of this information, the publications that you have done, your peer review, all of this can be added to your ORCID record. And then we'll go through that later on how that is possible. It also meet requirements. So the first one we're going to talk about is requirements from funders. So we have funders out, many funders that are actually requiring or encouraging the use of ORCID ID. So with our membership, with ORCID membership, for example, we have American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, Bright Focus Foundation. All of them are requiring ORCID IDs or encouraging you to have an ORCID ID when you are applying for grants, when you're applying for funding at their organization. So they want you to have an ORCID ID so that way they can verify that it is you, or they want you to have the um, an ORCID to have an ORCID ID with an ORCID record to have all to be able to see what your previous work, for example, what are the publications that you have done. So all of this is really important to have. And federal funders also are starting to require ORCID IDs or encouraging you to have one. In the past few years, the Presidential Memorandum or the National Security Presidential Memo 33 are actually um, having all of the federal agencies to have some sort of policy when it comes to persistent identifier for individuals, which is primarily like ORCID is one of a persistent identifier for an individual. So they want investigators, researchers to have some sort of an identifier. So that way they know what this researcher have done previously. Um, us in the Orchid US community, we have created a summary of US federal agencies related to their Orchid policies. So Kayla actually just shared that link to you all. So take a look at it, see what the federal agencies are, their policies are related to Orchid. And that's in response to this presidential memo. And other kind of federal policies as well are getting have orchid related policies that are attached to it. So I would definitely take a look at that. And having an ORCID ID as well, from a funder standpoint, especially from the federal agencies, it streamlines Science CV bias sketches. So Science CV actually has a connection with ORCID. So when you have an ORCID ID and ORCID record, you can log into your to Science CV, and then you can create a bias sketch, gathering data or grabbing data from your ORCID record. So you could add the articles or the works, the bibliography that you have in your ORCID record directly to your biosketch, for example. And this is an example of that here. So you could actually use sort of like an external source, which is ORCID, when you are creating a biosketch, and then you can populate that biosketch with information from your ORCID record. And here, an example of that, here's the products that I want to attach to my biosketch. For example, I can select the different articles that are imported from my ORCID record and attach that to my biosketch. So that makes it easier for you as a researcher to create a biosketch using ORCID. It also meet requirements from publishers. When you are submitting your manuscript for publications, oftentimes publishers now are requiring or asking for your ORCID ID. Um, for example, Springer Nature, American Chemical Society, IEEE, they're asking for your ORCID IDs when you're submitting for your manuscript. And a lot of this has something to do of, say, creating or adding your ORCID ID in the DOI metadata to make sure that you are actually getting credit for the publications that you have done. So this is an example from Springer Nature, for example, that they're requesting all authors identified as the corresponding authors to create and linked an ORCID with their account on their submissions manuscript system. So this is a good one to kind of take a look at. And what they can do here is to have that ORCID ID, like I said, in the DOI metadata. That's just one of it in the workflows of publishing workflow related to ORCID. So here, for example, when they add that DOI metadata in your ORCID ID in the DOI metadata, they can then push that publication, that citation to Crossref, and Crossref will then add it to your ORCID record. So that's a way for an information, a publication to be added to your ORCID record. And then we'll go through this in a little bit more in much details later on. And then you can publishers can also push peer review activities in the same way. So you're working in the manuscript submission system, you're reviewing it there, and then having your ORCID ID, they can then push that you are a reviewer for this particular journal to your ORCID record. All right. So research organizations are also using ORCID. So examples such as like Binghamton University, Florida State University, RTI International, University of Arkansas, they are asking their researchers, their faculty to have an ORCID ID, for example. They could, they may not be requiring it, but they're very encouraging faculty and researchers to have an ORCID ID and ORCID record to have it in their as part of their work in the university. And a big part of this is to really streamline a lot of the things that you're probably doing as a faculty, as a researcher at the university. So it streamlines, say, your faculty reports, right? So an example here from Florida State University, where you could gather publications from your ORCID record and add that to your faculty reports towards the end of the year. You could also gather your publications. An example here from Oklahoma State University, you can gather the articles, things from your ORCID record to be then displayed as your faculty profile at the university. So this really is to streamline a lot of the things that you're already doing anyways at the university. So ultimately, like I said earlier, all of this is to really save you time as a researcher, because a lot of the things are interconnected. So interoperability between the different systems, from say your organization to a funding system, to then say a discovery system, and to a publisher system. So all of this is interconnected. So you have that information, you're at the center as a researcher, you're at the center of that ecosystem. Right. So funding agencies can push information to your ORCID record. They can gather information from your ORCID record. Publishers can do the same thing. So all of this is designed to make it better and easier for you as a researcher and to save you time as a researcher. All right. So now that we know about what is ORCID, what the benefits of ORCID are, let's go to kind of some information on how you can populate your ORCID record. So this is sort of like, how you can enter this information into your ORCID record, entering your employment, entering your publications, all of those things. So adding information to your ORCID record. So these are the different sections where you can add information to your ORCID record. So your biographical information, employment, education and qualifications, invited positions and distinctions, memberships and service, funding, and works. The last two sections here, the peer review and research resources, are only able to be added by trusted organizations. So only the organizations that you worked with. So it could be a publisher are the only ones, or funding agencies are the ones that are putting peer review activities. Um, Laboratories or organizations that are using research resources are the only ones can add those information to ORCID record. So what I'm saying here is like those last two, you can't manually enter them. They're only available if the organizations that you're working with are pushing that information to your ORCID record. All right, so the ways that you can add information to your ORCID record. So today we're going to go through a manual entry of adding information. We'll go through a search and link wizard as well, and then automatically via trusted organizations. So adding manual entry or a manual entry to your ORCID record. An example here is adding an employment information to your ORCID record. So a good way to do this when you're in your ORCID record is that there's different sections, like on top, the employment, there will be like a link or an icon that says add. So you can add your employment. So click on add, and then there will be a pop-up, what you're seeing here, with basically a form. And then you can start typing in your organization. So when I'm typing in, for example, Northwestern, where I used to work, so I can start typing that in, Northwestern, there will be a predictive kind of text that will start popping up. And then you can choose the organizations that you worked at. Now, I recommend that you do this is that when you're adding manual entry to your information to your affiliations to your ORCID record, like employment, education. When you start typing in, and then you'll see the organizations that you worked at. So like Northwestern University, click on that. And that's a way for you to add that information to have the metadata already included in there. And that's important to have. Um, so that way you're also not like having a typo in your ORCID record because sometimes when you're typing so fast, there will be a typo. So add Northwestern University and then go ahead and add the employment details. Um, so that could be like which department you worked at, the role and the titles that you have, or the start date and the end date. So adding those details will also help having more information in your ORCID record. And then you go ahead and save that information to your ORCID record. When you go ahead and save that, this is what it would look like in your ORCID record, right? So your employment information is added to your ORCID record. So when I typed in Northwestern University, I typed in my role, what my role was, and then the start date and the end date. All of this information are added to your ORCID record, including sort of like that details when I click on the record itself. You will also notice that there's a source at the bottom when you are manually entering this information yourself, the source of the data will be yourself. So since you're adding it yourself, and then we'll take a look at why that kind of important and what's the difference between the different source in a little bit. So other manual entries that you can do in your ORCID record. So like I said, other affiliations like educations, qualifications, invited positions, distinctions, memberships, and service, you can manually add those information in your ORCID record. Biographical information as well. So your biography, for example, your names, also known as. So I always add that myself, the different variations of my names, the country keywords, and if you have websites and social links, if you want to add that, you can add that manually to your ORCID record. Now, the other way that you can add other kind of information or other methods of adding information to your ORCID record, in the works section, you can add your works or your articles or other kind of works that you have done. So it could be a patent, for example, using a search and link wizard. When you look at this screenshot, when you click on add, you kind of gives you an idea on the different ways that you could add publications to your ORCID records. You could add it by a DOI. You could use your PubMed ID, a bibtex file, for example, or you can add it manually. But to make it easier for you to save you time, it's good to do like a search and link wizard. Now the question is, what is a search and link wizard? So a search and link wizard is a built-in tool in ORCID. So when you click on search and link wizard, there will be a pop-up. So what you're seeing here on that other screenshot, for example, that's have the different databases that you could link to. Um, so what it is you could import your works from different databases that's already linked in ORCID. So it could be like Crossref metadata search, DataCite. It could be uh, EuroPubMed, actually. So the European version of PubMed. So if you have works in PubMed, you can actually use EuroPubMed because the information in PubMed is pretty much the same in EuroPubMed as well. So you can do that too. So this really to make adding works to your publication or your work section easier for you. So let's go through an example here. So let's go with Crossref metadata search. So when I click on Crossref metadata search, I will then ask to authorize or give permission to Crossref metadata search. So what this is that there will be a pop-up that gives you kind of information and authorization access to your ORCID record. So you will give Crossref metadata search access to your ORCID. So that's what that is. So that way you could update your ORCID record. Now, this is really important because when you are connecting with different um, databases or systems using your ORCID, you should always not give you give them authorization. What I'm saying is that you have control of your ORCID record because they will be asking you to authorize access. You can authorize access, and of course, you can also deny the access if you don't want to make the connection. So that's really up to you.
That would be like if you have something embarrassing.
Good question. You can always we can actually I'll talk more about that in a little bit actually. That's a very good question. All right. So let's say you're connecting with Crossref, right? Here's an example. When you make that authorization, for example, you will then be brought to the Crossref metadata search database. In here, you can search for your name, you can search for your ORCID ID, you can search for the article, a DOI. So here's an example. I'm just searching for my name, right? And then all of these publications will show up. And then I would look for which publications do I have that's available here. So down below, you will see that says Books on Demand. So that's a publication that I have not added to my ORCID record. When you go in there, there will be an icon that says uh, add to ORCID. It's a little faint, but it says add to ORCID. I would click on that, and then Crossref would then ask me if I want this to be added to my ORCID record. I could say no, I could say yes. I definitely want to say yes, right? I want this added to my ORCID record. And then once you say yes, it will then, when you refresh that system, that database, it will then say in your ORCID record. So that means that that particular ORCID record has been added, that particular publication citation has been added to your ORCID record. And this is what it would look like in my ORCID record. Um, so that particular information, that citation is added to my ORCID record, and then it will be available there. And then the source will be my name via Crossref metadata search. So since I'm the one that's adding it to my ORCID record, but it's through a system. So Search and Link Wizard are also available in the funding section of ORCID. So it's the same process. You would click Add, click on Search and Link Wizard, and then there's only one available funding database that's in the Search and Link Wizard in ORCID, and that's Dimensions Wizard. So it's the same process. You would click there, you would give authorization, and then you would search for the funding that you have received and add it to ORCID. So that's an example of that. Now, the other way that you can add that information or publications or other things can be added to your ORCID record is through trusted organizations. So trusted organizations are the systems or organizations that you connected your ORCID ID to so that you have given authorizations. So let's say, for example, here again, that Crossref metadata search, you give them authorization to access your ORCID record. Or for example, I would give access to the DOE database, the OSTI database. So I would do that. So the trusted organizations that you have given permissions to will be available. You'll have a list of those organizations or databases or systems in your ORCID record. If you go to, like, say, your name at the top right section of your ORCID record, and then there will be a section that says trusted parties. So you would click there, and this is a list of the different systems or different organizations that I have given permissions to. And they are what we're calling trusted organizations. Now, as a researcher, like I mentioned earlier, you have full control of your ORCID record. You could revoke access at any time. So there's that link, that's our icon that says revoke access, right? So you can revoke access to the organizations at any time. So let's say when I work at Northwestern, let's say I connected my ORCID ID with Northwestern, for example. Um, and I left Northwestern and I would like I don't really want to I don't want Northwestern to have access to my ORCID record anymore. I could revoke that access at any time if I wanted to. So why is it important to connect with different organizations? So you connect with, say, your funding agency. So let's say American Heart Association, for example. Why is that important to do that? Now, automatically trusted organizations can push things automatically to your ORCID organization if they have a system that are set up for it. So an example here, so if you've connected with Binghamton University, if you are an employee at Binghamton University, Binghamton University could push an employment information to your ORCID record. Or if you're connected with American Heart Association and you have a fund of a funding that you've received at American Heart Association, they could push that funding information to your ORCID record. And the same thing with a publisher, for example. So an example here with Vivly, they can then push what you've contributed to Vivly's repository to your ORCID record, so the citation. So when trusted organizations pushes that data to your ORCID record, they become the source of the data. So you can see the difference between when I'm adding employment myself. I'm the source of the data. But here, Binghamton University is adding that information. So they are the source of the data of that particular entry to your ORCID record. So now that brings us to what we're calling a trust marker. You're seeing a bunch of like check marks, a green check marks in your ORCID record. That's what we're calling a trust marker. The trust marker itself adds more credibility and validity to your ORCID record because we know that this particular organization pushed that information to your ORCID record. So that means there's more verification to it. You can really say that you worked at Binghamton University because this source is Binghamton University, or that you really received this funding from American Heart Association. And that's because there's a trust marker in your ORCID record. That green check marks is good to have in your ORCID record. Now, this brings us to that question about, if you want to like hide some of the things that you want, right? That you want to be hidden a little bit. So, as a researcher, you have full control. We've been talking about that. You have full control of your ORCID record, and that includes the visibility of your ORCID record. So, you can control the visibility of your ORCID record. So you can control the entire thing if you want to. You could say, I want my ORCID record available publicly. So you can change that to everyone. You can change it to trusted organizations only. Trusted organizations are the ones that you've only given permissions to, right? So that's the only people that could see your ORCID record. Or you can change it to only me, private, which doesn't make sense. As a researcher, you want to share what you have. So if you're only putting in only me, doesn't make sense as much. So you can do that with a full ORCID record. But you could also do it individually. You could also do it, let's say, in the different individual entry of your ORCID record. So let's say I want to hide a particular publication. For example, I just want it available to my organization. You can change it to trusted organizations only. Or let's say I have an employment information, but I only really, want my employer to know that I have that. So you can just change that to trusted organizations, that particular entry. Or if you want to hide a complete entry of like employment. So let's say I work at this organization, but I really don't want to share that information at all with anyone. You can change that entry to just only me or private only or privately available. So, so yeah, as a researcher, you have full control on the visibility of your ORCID record as a whole or as the different entries of your ORCID record. So that's a big part of what you can do with your ORCID record. So now we're actually at the end of things. So as a researcher, if you do see an ORCID ID icon, that you'll see the ID icon, For the most part, there will be some sort of integration or some sort of connection with ORCID in that system. So we encourage you to use your ORCID ID whenever you see this kind of connection. So that way you could easily, you know, maybe share your ORCID record or share things about you as a researcher by in the system with connecting your ORCID ID. Or that system might be able to push information to your ORCID record. So that way you don't have to. So you don't have to enter your publication, you don't have to enter the funding that you receive, that sort of thing, to make it easier for you as a researcher. All right. So when we share the recording, we will also share this slide deck with you, and there will be links such as like resources that's available, additional things that you could use. So let's say you are a seasoned researcher, for example, and you don't have an ORCID ID yet, an ORCID record, but you have a lot of publications already available in, say, in your Google Scholar profile page. You can upload that. You can download a BibTeX file and upload it to ORCID. That makes it easier for you to just upload all your citations to ORCID. So there's a how-to guide and this slide deck for you to do that. So all of this information is available in the slide deck. At the tail end of this slide deck, we also have additional how-tos to kind of give you more uh, details on what you can do with Orchid. All right, so now we went through that presentation. Let's take a look at some questions that you all have. I'm going to stop sharing. And let's see. All right, so what questions do we have? Um,
You've already answered mine. You can skip those.
Wonderful, great. And we will also add this on our summary so that we will share with you. Perfect, okay. Okay, so commercial profiling system that currently had integrations with ORCID ID is that dimensions. So what I'm saying on that one, for a search and link wizard in ORCID for the funding section of ORCID, there's only dimensions available there. But of course, you can connect some systems, you can connect directly with ORCID outside of ORCID search and link wizard. So you could connect with Clarivate, for example. You can connect with Web of Science, but within just in your ORCID record, for example, on the funding section, if you want to add funding, let me pull up my ORCID record so we can kind of see what we're talking about here. But basically, in that section there, it's just dimensions. All right, so let me share my screen so you all can see this. All right. You should be seeing a login page for ORCID. Perfect. All right. So I'm gonna log into my ORCID, and this is my ORCID record here. If I'll go to the funding section of ORCID, and then I don't have any funding, but let's say I have funding that I have received. And if I'll do this, I'll go add. There's a search and link wizard link. So in here, when you do a search and link wizard to add your funding information, there's only dimensions wizard that's available. So that's what that is in here. But in your publication section, in the work section, if I do search and link wizard here, there are multiple search and link wizards built in ORCID that you can use to search for your publications that you can add to your ORCID record. I hope that helps clarify some things. All right. Any other question?
I can read off a few that came through the chat for you, Paulo.
Thank you, Kayla.
So there was one question regarding the ORCID and ORCID records. How can we be sure that this person is who they say they are? Is there a verification process for the ORCID record?
Good question. So, so it's really, a lot of this, it's really kind of comes down to the researcher, the person that's adding the information. So, we trust that the person is putting the information correctly and that they are adding um, the correct information in their ORCID record. Of course, there's some potentially bad actors out there that may misrepresent themselves. So a lot of this is really about it's kind of similar thing when you have, when you're looking at a resume, a CV, right? You trust that person that they're providing the correct information in their ORCID in their CV, as well as they are the person that they said they are. So a lot of this is really good. This really comes down to that. And this is also why it's important for organizations to be part of that ecosystem of putting information in somebody's ORCID record. So we're seeing, like, say, an example with Binghamton University, making sure that they're putting that employment information to ORCID and having that check mark. So that's a form of verification from the organization itself that that person works at Binghamton University, or that, say, Web of Science pushing peer review activity to ORCID, letting us know that this person is really a reviewer for that particular journal. So it's really a big part of this is that each player, each part of the ecosystem is playing a role and a responsibility of making sure that that verification, the data that's available in ORCID is accurate. Um, ORCID itself does not, verify that this person is who is it's who they're supposed to be. So it's really up to the players, the people that are involved in the entire ecosystem to make that verification.
We also had another question. How often are ORCID records updated from Crossref and other sources? You may not know this, but
Right. So when you are pushing data from Crossref, for example, it automatically adds it to your ORCID record. So it's really kind of automatic. Um, as far as like the data that's available in Crossref, I don't really know how often they do that. That's really up to Crossref on how often they are updating the data. But when you are pushing data to your ORCID record, adding from different systems, it should get added right away. Um, so that's, yeah.
we did have another question that just came through the chat. What do universities or colleges need to do to become a part of ORCID?
Sure. Good question. All right, so let me share this link with you all. Now, for a researcher, an ORCID ID is free, an ORCID record is free. So that's really, anyone can be plugged in to ORCID without some sort of membership. So that's available there. For organizations, um, if you want to say, I want to push employment information to ORCID of our faculty, of our researcher. For those kind of things, you would need to be a member of ORCID and to be able to push data to ORCID using the member API, or um, to connect your system with ORCID. So I've shared a membership information with you all for organizations that want to be members of ORCID. So you can take a look at that, but essentially you could go through us here at ORCID US community. You can be part of our membership, which is now over 200 member organizations. Um, and then we can talk more about how that would fit in your organizations. What depending on what you want to do with ORCID. So let's say you want to push employment, or you want to push funding information or you want to push, say, um, publications. The other side of that too is like, let's say I want to grab articles from ORCID so that way I can upload that to my um, faculty information system, like say digital measures or symplectic elements or pure within your organization. So um, a lot of those things would also involve membership with ORCID as well. I hope that answers your question. If you want to talk more in details about this, we're happy to meet with you as well and give you more insight on how best you can use ORCID at your organization. You can just email us at orcidus@lyrasis.org.
We did just get another question in the chat.
Sure.
I'm assisting a staff member who oversees accreditation and wants to encourage more faculty to use ORCID. I know one concern the faculty have is the time it takes to add items to the ORCID record, as they have other places that need to update for university purposes. In addition to the search and link tools that you mentioned, are there other time-saving measures the researchers or the institution itself can do to help this process?
Good question. So the search and link wizard I highly recommend that because it's available there. Now, for example, and this is probably gonna kind of involve quite a lot in terms of, say, when you have researchers that have not really used ORCID at all, and the information needs to be added into ORCID record, and um, they may have a lot of what do you call this, publications already. So let me pull this up for you all. And this is actually available on the slide deck as well. Um, so this is available on the tail end of the slide deck that we will be sharing with you in the additional how-tos. And hopefully you see this now, which is what we're calling import export works using BibTeX. You should see that. Let me know if you're not seeing it.
We see
But
it.
here, okay, perfect. So here, what we're gonna go through is sort of like a way for you to batch upload publications to your ORCID record. So in ORCID, you can upload sort of multiple citations at once using BibTeX file. So here you can click on add, and then it says add BibText. And then choose BibTeX to upload that file in. And then you basically just add it here. You can also export out from ORCID as well. You can export out using the BibTeX. But let me see if we can share this link. I'm going to share this link with you all here. We have an instructions for this as well. It's available. On how you can, say, for example, from your Google Scholar profile page. So you can download those citations from Google Scholar and upload it to your ORCID record. So it's essentially that BibTeX file uploading to ORCID. That's the process there. So that would be a good time saving, especially if you already have multiple citations that you don't have that's not added to ORCID. And I believe on if you have what are you calling this? A reference management system, or I can't think of it right now, a citation kind of system like Zotero, those kind of systems. Yes, thank you, Wendy. A citation management system. You could also, I believe, you can also change some of those files into a BibTeX file and upload it to ORCID. All right. Any other question? I hope that answers the question, actually.
There was another one. Can a school within a university join and provide check marks for faculty? We'd be interested in leveraging ORCID data for annual faculty reviews.
So You're thinking of like pushing, say, publications or employment to ORCID. So all of this is really depends on what systems you're using at your organization. So if you say your system is capable of writing to ORCID, you should be able to do that. So like I've used Binghamton University a lot. So Binghamton University created a system, an ORCID integration that's able to push employment information to ORCID. Georgia State is also doing the same thing. So Georgia State University created an integration with ORCID that's able to push that information to ORCID. So that's one way that's you can have check marks in your ORCID record. There are other ways that's also available. Like ORCID has a built-in system that's what we call affiliation manager. Affiliation manager is essentially a built-in system within that's available to ORCID members through us, actually through the ORCID US community. Um, they can then upload a CSV file and then push those files, that information to ORCID. So we will share that detailed information when we share this recording and slide deck with you all. So that way you can see how that works. And then we will I believe we have a recording of it as well, of a particular organization that used that particular system to be able to push like employment, education, it could be distinction to ORCID record. All right, we are actually at the top of the hour. Any other last minute questions? If we can't answer your questions, or if you have any questions, just email it to us at orchidus@lyrasis.org. We will respond to you. If there's anything that we missed on the chat, we will also include that in our follow-up email, including the recording and slide deck to everyone. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Um, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you do have any questions. Thank you all.